The notion of a nation is very fragile. India, throughout all its 70 years of independence and more, still is obsessed about are we a single one nation or not. And they have trouble in Nagaland and so on and so forth. So BJP had that thing, but when they got elected first time with majority, they didn't think they had acquired enough sort of depth in power. When they got re-elected and they smashed Congress twice, they said, okay, we may not get a third chance like this. We have to fulfill our core cultural political agenda. And 370, 35A, they're obsessed about that. In one sense, Modi and Shah have made reality of what was, made a legal reality of what was already there. They have thought through it very thoroughly, and the way they did it, first you dilute Article, 370, Section 3, and then you change 368 from Constituent Assembly to Legislative Assembly, and then you come back and use President's rule to pass things in Lok Sabha and Rajya Sabha, and with the people's majority. This is not a hastily done thing.
Our fight has always been for the right to self-determination, something both India and Pakistan agreed upon in the UN, which led to the Security Council resolutions on Kashmir. India have broken their own past promises of holding a plebiscite in Kashmir and have been changing the nature of Kashmir for years, as mentioned by Lord Desai. Abrogating Article 370 and 35A in the way that they have reflects the blatant disregard India has for the UN resolutions and international laws, but also demonstrates the openly sinister politics of Narendra Modi, the BJP and the RSS. India have used various tactics on Kashmiris to force, coerce and intimidate the people to accept slavery. And on the 5th of August, India used a bulldozer to try and crush Kashmiris once and for all. It's now plain and obvious that the people do not matter to India. The territory matters, for their settler colonial project to force demographic change, maybe for military and strategic positioning, maybe for the innumerable types of minerals and natural resources, or maybe for the hydroelectric potential. When we talk about the way forward, we must recognise the atrocities committed on people and realise that the subjugated are not responsible for their condition and therefore should not be held responsible for their reaction. The onus is not on the subjugated and oppressed to find a peaceful solution, but on the oppressor, as well as the international community, to make sure the voices of the subjugated are heard, international laws are upheld, and justice is delivered. But most importantly, that any solution is in line with the aspirations of the oppressed. I am here to merely convey to you what the people inside occupied Kashmir feel the solution and way forward is. If we are to find a way forward, it must be according to the aspirations of the people, international law, the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, and the UN resolutions, which are at the least building blocks. For more than 70 years, Kashmiris have faced persecution and suffered unimaginable war crimes and crimes against humanity, such as the hundreds of thousands orphaned, tens of thousands raped and gang raped, thousands of mass graves, draconian laws, enforced disappearances, widows and half-widows, human shields, torture, killing, pellets, the list is endless. And all this while Kashmir was enjoying the special status of Article 370 and 35A that was benevolently granted by India.
Kashmir is a very long conflict that has outlived many, many geopolitical conjunctures. And this is another one. I agree, the post-colonial nationalism is very territorial. But I think it's also populist nationalism that we see around the world. And in our region, two countries, India and Pakistan, have a long battle of completing their nationhood through borderlands. And that's a very territorial dispute also. But there are many other dimensions, and one of the dimensions is of people of Kashmir. So I believe that all these political realities and positions, they exist, whether we like them or dislike them. I think what needs to happen is that there has to be a space, there has to be a process that brings these different views irrespective of the fact that they seemingly remain irreconcilable. Let me emphasize that. They seem very, very different. But they need to confront each other. It will never ever be an international solution, whether you internationalize, whether you go at any level. It will only happen because it's fundamentally a political problem. It will only happen when the people from that region, and including all these voices, I'm not saying that it just has to be based in Srinagar. All these divergent views, what is India's view on that? What is its insecurity or security or nationalism? That has to be heard and understood. Similarly, what's Pakistan's insecurity or nationalism? But at the same time, it will have to be primarily a local, where local meets local, local meets national, local meets regional, and local meets global.
What we've seen in the last 30 years is a low-level type of insurgency. But 30 years is a new generation, and the new generation that's there now, and I met some of them when I was in the Valley in May, they're young and they're angry. They don't see life the way we see it. I spoke to people who said, we have no hope, we're going to take up the gun. I said, no, don't take up the gun, you're too young to die. But when life feels hopeless, or when you feel angry, you don't see the value of your life the way that we might see the value of our lives. Equally, what might seem extraordinary when we're talking in the Houses of Parliament is that they feel they don't see the longevity. They just think that their parents will be proud of them, and they'll have a lot of people at their funeral. And that's tragic. They need to live. They need to feel that they have a future and prospects. I spoke at a school in Srinagar when I was there, and there were about 150 young students of 16, 17. I'm sure we're all parents, or we've got nieces and nephews, or we've got godchildren whose future we're interested in. And these students, they were so eager to go to school, to feel they might have the prospect of work and jobs and moving about like we all move about. And one girl said to me, if I study, do you think I can get to Oxford? And another girl said, I really like writing poetry. Do you think, is it good for me to write poetry? Because I feel, I could be a poet. This is what I think we lose sight of when we do talk about it as a territorial issue, is that when we give the statistics of 8 million people living in the valley, these people all have aspirations like all of us. And so we're in this really difficult position where, are they going to meekly be happy to be bought over? Or are they going to come out fighting and angry? And tragically, we can't really influence that. What can influence it is the conditions under which they live. And as I've said on a few of the interviews I've done recently, if you're going to put forward a measure which is meant to be for the benefit of the people, the lockdown, the shutdown, doesn't bode very well. The lack of consultation. Tahir's right, there has to be participation. There was no consultation for this. Yes, they might have sat and planned it. And certainly I knew people in the valley when I was there who were worried that once the election was over, this was going to go through. But the people weren't consulted. And I think one of the problems of nationalism is we're getting away from diversity. And it's almost like we've all got to be the same. India is such a multicultural, such a multi-linguistic country. But why couldn't they allow the Kashmiris this pride in their Kashmiri culture? Why do they have to bring them all as being part of the Indian Union, this Indian Union territory? How are they going to feel? Are they going to rejoice? I don't think so.
Article 370 was passed by India's Constituent Assembly in October 1949 with some debate but no opposition. On paper, it gave the former princely state of Jammu and Kashmir a huge amount of autonomy. But over the decades, that autonomy has been diluted, those provisions have been hollowed out, so that in practical terms, Jammu and Kashmir as an Indian state has had less autonomy than any other state and a more regular pattern of interference by Delhi. So the importance of the article and its special status was not practical, it was symbolic. But on both sides, that symbolic importance was huge. For the Hindu nationalists of the BJP, there was the irksome fact that Jammu and Kashmir, India's only Muslim majority state, had special privileges in the constitution. It wasn't the only state that had special privileges, but it had more extensive special status than any other state. And as John said, the BJP and its forebears right back to the early 1950s have said, we're going to scrap Article 370, and now they have. For Kashmiris, it was the only expression of their autonomy that there was. And it's about identity. Can you think of other issues around us today that are about identity? Kashmiris, I'm talking about the Kashmiris of the Kashmir Valley, by and large, do not feel Indian. They don't particularly want to be part of India. At one stage, many Kashmiris might have been comfortable being part of India. At the moment, they're not. Let me also be clear, I don't think very many wish to be part of Pakistan either. I believe the scrapping of Article 370 was wrong. It was unilateral of an act which was by its nature bilateral. I think the manner in which it was done was quite appalling. I think many of us will be aware of what happened in 1975 in India, when Indira Gandhi declared the emergency. What happened in the Kashmir Valley in particular, similar events happened in Jammu, but the focus was on the Kashmir Valley in early August, bore a very uncomfortable echo of the emergency, with politicians, trade unionists, civil society leaders, human rights activists being arrested with little sign of due process in the middle of the night. How many? We don't know. Somewhere between several hundred, and the highest estimate I've seen is 4,000. But the fact that we don't actually know is actually, in a sense, part of the story, because there is no transparency about what happened.
What this recent move has done is to deliberately try and eliminate any grey areas and to provoke an increase of violence at a time of their choosing, so that they can deal with it in the way that to completely crush Kashmiris. Kashmir is an unfinished project of two kinds of competing Indian nationalisms, and that right-wing Indian nationalism, which has ever more become prominent, is of course positions itself against a secular democratic narrative. There are many Kashmirs, I should also tell you that, and many Kashmiris, by which I mean that there are many imaginaries of Kashmir. It is, as a region, as the entire region, it has different religions, different regions, different identities. And Tahir's point about creating a narrative, it can be done, certainly processes leading up to the Northern Ireland Good Friday Agreement were an effort. So it can be done, but it's important to focus also on the fact that there are these different narratives, and we cannot actually move towards anything better unless we take that difference into account, because if we don't, then the right-wing project just uses the resentments of one against the other, combines them with the Hindutva agenda and says, oh well, we're doing it for the benefit of this people in these other region or the people of this other identity. So it's important for us to focus on that. Kashmir has been a long-standing victim of imperial cartography first, and then of post-colonial securitizations, faced with non-linear cycles of violence every few years, with the predictability, you have these enormous, horrific numbers of deaths of people. The crucial issue of consent here, people's consent. You cannot claim to act in any democratic manner if you have absolutely no consent of people who you put under collective punishment. And the arbitrariness of the way in which power is exercised is emphatically, that arbitrariness is also emphatically colonial in the way in which it has been carried out. There have been these emergency powers legislation, the Armed Forces Special Powers Act, Public Safety Act, that have been there for decades now. And now there will be other security acts that will also be available to be used in Kashmir. So it's also done that. I think that it is important for us, in order to retain some measure of hope in a very hopeless situation, to think about the urgent and the important both. By which I mean the short-run situation of what is happening, the misery, and how best to mitigate that and to keep raising our voice to mitigate that, but also the longer-run situation of what is important in the long run, to make sure that these narratives do not, this kind of narrative does not settle with any clarity, with any ease. It is important to find ways of moving forward, and I think that is where our role, as maybe not even as states may have their strategic interests, but people do have, if national interests are even remotely constructed, and not merely reflected by the actors of the state, then we have a role as citizens wherever we are in trying to make some kind of an intervention into